Welcome back. So today's deep dive, it feels a bit like we're opening a time capsule, actually. We're looking at this really dense piece of philosophical writing, but also scientific, from way back in 1921. And the amazing thing is it offers this framework for understanding consciousness that seems, well, almost perfectly designed for the debates happening in neuroscience right now.
It really does. It's quite prescient.
The source we're digging into is an analysis from the Human and AI Learning Institute, HALE. And it focuses specifically on Abdu'l-Bahá's tablet to Dr. Auguste Forel. Now, Forel, we need to be clear who this guy was. He wasn't just, anyone. He was a major figure, a top neuroanatomist, psychiatrist, a real giant in science at the time.
Absolutely. His work was foundational.
And this tablet, this letter, was essentially a response, a spiritually grounded counter-argument to the materialism that Forel, and honestly, much of the scientific world back then, was championing.
Exactly. It was aimed squarely at that prevailing scientific view. You have to remember the climate in 1921. There was this huge confidence, almost an assumption, really, that everything, mind, consciousness, maybe even free will, it could all be boiled down to physics and chemistry, brain stuff.
The reductionist assumption, yeah. We keep bumping into that.
That's the one.
So our mission today is to pull out that counter framework from the tablet. It's presented as a whole system for understanding the soul reality. We want to grasp those core ideas, the challenging ones, and then see how they hold up against, 21st century science, especially the science that's starting to show cracks in that old reductionist model.
It's a fascinating comparison to make.
Okay, then. Let's unpack this.
Right. So to really get why the tablet was so, maybe radical is the right word. In 1921, we need to see it didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was building on this really long, deep tradition of thinking about the soul in Western thought, long before brain scans.
Mm-hmm. And the HALE analysis points this out, right? It names names. It starts with people like Socrates. His whole focus was on introspection, the examined life, understanding yourself from the inside out.
Putting consciousness, that inner experience, right at the center.
Which then leads you to Plato. He took it a step further, didn't he? Into metaphysics. His theory of forms, the idea that the real things are these perfect, abstract ideals, and what we see is just a shadow.
Exactly, suggesting right away there's more to reality than just the physical stuff we can touch, a non-material layer.
And then there's Aristotle. He was more systematic, grounded. He built systems of logic, classified living things, kind of laid the groundwork for the scientific method itself in a way.
He absolutely did. And it's interesting that classical structure he provided actually set up the problem the tablet later tackles. Aristotle's classification, for instance. It created this hierarchy of beings.
Right, based on complexity, function.
Yeah. And that way of thinking, that structure, it evolved over centuries through scholasticism, the scientific revolution, and eventually led to the very disciplines Forel was a master of. Neuroanatomy, psychiatry. Yeah. But those disciplines were still wrestling with that fundamental mind-body problem.
So the tablet uses that same kind of structured thinking, that legacy, but to argue against pure materialism.
Precisely. It's offering a structured, organized rebuttal, not just sort of a vague spiritual feeling. It meets materialism on its own ground, in a sense.
Okay, that makes sense. That structure is key. Because now we can get into the really core concepts from the tablet itself, the ones that directly challenge that brain creates mind idea. This is where it gets really interesting. It's like a multi-layered view of reality. Consciousness isn't just some biological fluke.
Right. And the first concept is probably the biggest hurdle for a traditional materialist. It says the mind. It's not a product of the brain, not something the brain makes.
Which is the standard view, yeah. Emergent property and all that.
Instead, the tablet says the mind is a property of the soul. The soul itself is the source, the origin point for our mental faculties, our intellect.
Whoa, hang on.
Right.
Okay. If the soul is the source and the mind is its property, what does that make the brain? Just like wetware. How does the soul talk to the brain?
That's the crucial question, isn't it? The tablet implies the brain isn't the generator. It's more like an intermediary, an instrument. Think of a radio analogy. The radio doesn't create the music, right? It just picks up the broadcast signal.
Okay, so if the radio is broken, the music stops, but the orchestra is still playing somewhere else.
Exactly. The brain facilitates, it expresses the mental faculties originating from the soul, but the source, the signal, is the soul. It completely flips the common neurological assumption.
Okay, that's a big flip. And that idea of interaction, it connects to the second concept, right? The gradation of spirit. This sounds structural too, like systems biology thinking almost.
It is very structural. It argues that everything has a spirit fitting its level of existence. The tablet outlines a clear hierarchy. You start with minerals.
Minerals have a spirit.
In this view, yes. A spirit appropriate to their being, their coherence, their chemical structure, their properties. Then you move up. Plants have that mineral spirit plus the power of growth.
Okay.
Animals have all that, plus sensation, movement, memory maybe. And then humans. We have all the lower levels, plus the rational, reflective spirit, the capacity for abstract thought, self-awareness.
That's a very structured view. It's saying complexity isn't random, it's nested, one level built on the next.
Precisely. The mineral is needed for the plant for the animal. It's an integrated system.
And if the soul is the independent source, like in the first concept.
Then the logical next step is the third concept, the independence of the soul.
The survival idea. If the mind isn't made by the brain, then it doesn't necessarily die with the brain.
That's the core assertion. The tablet directly challenges the idea that consciousness just ends, blinks out at death. It states the soul is independent of the body. It's active during sleep, sure, but critically it remains active after the body dies.
That's the direct hit on Forel's materialism then.
Absolutely. If the brain is just the radio, breaking the radio stops the sound here, but the broadcast continues. The soul, the signal, persists.
Which brings us neatly to the fourth concept, the tablet's critique of narrow materialism. It's saying the scientific method of 1921, relying only on the senses, was missing something fundamental.
Yes. It argues that real understanding, a truly holistic view, requires combining two kinds of perception. You need sensory perception, that's the scientific method, empirical data, observation.
Like objective stuff.
But the tablet insists you also need spiritual perception. Insight, intuition, maybe even revelation, ways of knowing that go beyond the purely physical senses. Relying only on the first is like trying to understand a person just by measuring their height and weight. You miss the essence.
Okay, wow. So that framework, laid out over a century ago, it sets the stage perfectly for where we are now. Because these ideas seem to be popping up again, don't they, in the cracks of modern science, the places where that purely brain-bound model of mind is hitting problems.
It really seems like the tablet anticipated these future fault lines. The alignment is striking.
Let's connect those dots then. How does this 1921 philosophy resonate with 21st century findings?
Well, take near-death experience research, NDEs. Think about studies like Dr. Sam Parnia's AWARE project. They're trying to objectively document cases where people report clear consciousness.
While they're clinically dead, no brain activity.
Exactly. When the brain is demonstrably offline, no measurable electrical activity. Yet, some patients report detailed experiences, sometimes even verifiable observations from outside their bodies.
Okay. But the standard pushback is always, it's just the dying brain firing randomly, right?
Yeah.
Lack of oxygen, maybe some kind of chemical release, some DMT or something.
Right, that's the materialist explanation. But the tablet's framework offers a different lens. It wouldn't deny that brain chemistry is involved, the radio is malfunctioning, sputtering. But scrambled signals don't explain coherent, structured, often life-changing experiences, especially those involving seemingly accurate perception from a vantage point outside the physical body.
So the NDE data aligns better with an independent consciousness briefly disconnected or poorly connected, rather than a brain hallucinating its own demise.
That's what the proponents argue. Yes, the persistence of a self, of awareness during bodily shutdown fits the independent soul model much more elegantly than it fits the brain creates mind model.
And it's not just NDEs, there's also terminal lucidity.
Ah, yes. That's another really challenging phenomenon for the standard model.
Explain that one. It's pretty startling, isn't it?
It is. You have someone, say, with severe Alzheimer's or another neurodegenerative disease. They might have been unresponsive, unable to recognize loved ones, maybe couldn't even speak for months or years. Their brain is physically ravaged by the disease.
Right. Scans would show significant damage.
Definitely. Then suddenly, maybe hours or sometimes even days before they die, they wake up. They become completely lucid. Clear memory, they recognize people, hold coherent conversations, express affection. They're fully back.
Wow. And then they pass away shortly after.
Often, yes. Now, if the brain is the mind, if the mind is produced by the physical brain, how does that happen? How does a severely damaged machine suddenly function perfectly again just before it shuts down completely? It seems physiologically impossible.
But from the tablet's perspective,
If the brain is the instrument and the soul is the musician, Perhaps the soul manages one final clear surge of expression through the failing instrument before the connection is severed permanently. It makes more sense within that framework.
It's a data point that strongly resists the purely material explanation.
It puts enormous pressure on it, yes.
And then we get into even more theoretical areas, like quantum consciousness theories. Hammeroff and Penrose, people like that.
Right. Their idea, or theory, suggests consciousness isn't just classical computation in neurons. It might originate at a deeper level, a quantum level, within the microtubules' tiny structures inside the brain cells.
Which pushes consciousness away from just being about brain chemistry and more towards fundamental physics. The structure of reality itself.
Kind of, yes. It hints that awareness might be woven into the fabric of the universe in some way, not just an emergent property of biological complexity. Which, interestingly, connects to other modern ideas like panpsychism.
The idea that consciousness, or some proto-consciousness, is a fundamental property of matter itself, even down to particles.
Sort of, yeah. Or related ideas in systems biology, which look at life and consciousness as properties of interconnected networks and systems, not just individual components. Both these lines of thought suggest a more distributed, integrated, maybe even nested reality.
Echoing that gradation of spirit hierarchy from the tablet.
The resonance is certainly there. A universe where awareness isn't just confined to human brains, but is present in different forms and degrees across various levels of complexity. It's a very different picture from simple materialism.
So it really does seem like these cutting-edge fields, NDE research, terminal lucidity, quantum biology, panpsychism, are all pointing towards a reality that's more layered, more complex, where consciousness isn't just a byproduct, and maybe mind isn't strictly tied to the physical brain in the way we assumed.
They are certainly challenging that older, simpler materialist assumption that the tablet took aim at back in 1921. It feels like science is, in some ways, catching up to the questions, if not the specific answers, posed in that text.
Okay, so let's try and synthesize this. We've looked at this 1921 tablet, responding to the science of its day, drawing on classical philosophy. It proposed this framework where the soul is primary, independent, the source of mind. It described a nested reality with a gradation of spirit.
And it critiqued relying only on sensory data, arguing for the need for spiritual perception, too.
And now, a century later, we see echoes, maybe confirmations, in unexpected corners of science. NDEs, terminal lucidity, quantum theories.
Right. The tablet essentially offered this complex, spiritually grounded view where deeper, perhaps non-physical realities influence the observable world. It argued against simple bottom-up material causality. It suggested the universe is, in a sense, structured for consciousness, rather than consciousness just being a lucky accident of the universe.
So what's the big takeaway here? For us, for you listening, it seems the core argument from the tablet is that if you limit your understanding of reality only to what your physical senses and instruments can measure, you're going to miss a huge part of the picture, maybe the most important part.
That true understanding, true knowledge, requires both. It requires the rigor of empirical science and the insight that comes from what the tablet calls spiritual perception.
Which leaves us with a pretty provocative thought, doesn't it? If that's true, if you really need both sensory and spiritual perception for a complete understanding. What crucial dimensions of life, of consciousness, maybe even of reality itself, is our current scientific method fundamentally blind to, simply because it restricts itself to only one of those inputs?
That's the question, isn't it? What might we be missing?